And last but not least this afternoon, before we split into discovery mode, our last conversation will focus on international relations and diplomacy. It's called Reconnecting Nations, the Impact of Feminist Diplomacy. And for this discussion, we will be welcoming on stage Kathryn Pilgrim, a fellow journalist, who will be facilitating this session with her panelists, Jocelyne, Adriant, Arancha, Gonzalez, Vanessa Frazier, and Begonia Lassa-Capasta. Please come and join us here on stage, ladies. And please welcome all our wonderful panelists and Kathryn Pilgrim, who will be moderating the discussion. Thank you and welcome.
So I am absolutely delighted to be here. I'm Kathryn Pilgrim. I'm a former international journalist, 30 years at CNN, and I'm now active in the world of peace and women, peace, and security, and I have my own consulting firm on corporate leadership. But I am overshadowed by the talent on this panel. It is quite amazing. Today we're talking about feminist diplomacy. And feminist diplomacy is really thought of as states promoting the presence of women in foreign affairs and international relations. But feminist diplomacy goes way beyond that, especially in these uncertain times. All foreign policy requires more active engagement. And the role of women diplomats is more important than ever to foster cooperation and peace. So joining us to discuss this, my panel is Jocelyne Adriant, the president of the International Committee of the French High Council of Equality between Women and Men. We have, let's do it in order, Vanessa Frazier, the permanent representative of Malta at the UN, and she is also represents Malta on the UN Security Council at the UN in New York. Arancha Gonzalez is the Dean of the Paris School of International Affairs, SciencesPo, and she's also the former Foreign Minister of Spain. And Begonia Lassa-Capasta is the Director of the Division of Gender Equity at UNESCO, and she has worked for UN Women in New York, and she was previously the women's representative to Tunisia, Lebanon, and Libya. So ladies, thank you for joining me here. I wanted to start basically for each of you to find out a little bit more about what it means to you, the term feminist diplomacy, and the concepts that have evolved because we have seen this change over the years. So I guess I will just target questions. And Begonia, why don't I start with you at the far end? Security Council Resolution 1325 is often applied to advocate for women in military and government. But in your experience, you have said that it is a much broader concept, that it is peer-to-peer diplomacy that's important, a type of track 3 diplomacy. Explain a little bit what that means to you.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy, and it's a pleasure to be with such a great woman and with all of you. Indeed, I mean, Women, Peace and Security next year will be the 25th anniversary, and is the Security Council resolution more translated in the world. And the idea behind the resolution was by civil society, women's networks, not so much that women had to get into the army, politics, yes, of course, but it was two things. One, it was to end the armament. And this is something we don't talk a lot. That was the big, huge ask of women. Let's try to disarm the world. And secondly, we want not to be seen as victims, but also as actors. And when we talk about diplomacy, there are different tracks, as you know. The first track, the big, mainly men, some women, but men in a table, big table, signing peace agreements, no women, thankfully a little bit more now. The second track, track 2, is the unofficial dialogue where it is being prepared by experts, scientifics, academics. Women appear there in a way that are preparing the terrain for this big official. There, we find more women. And the third track is where you find a lot of women doing the grassroots work. Women to women, when you have disarmament in countries, when you have release of prisoners, when you have reconciliations. And if I can, I can give an example of a story of Amal and Asia, two women in Libya from Misrata and Tawerga. Displaced, both of them, for different tribes, then they started to say, we cannot continue being displaced, all the families. So they start working with each other, and little by little, they start getting reconciled, and so a lot of thousands of families were able to get back to their original hometown after the problems. And it's so important what they did, that they were the ones that were able to make sure the reconciliation got to open the coastal road going from Misrata to Sirte, that is cross-cutting the whole country in Libya and the coastal road. And the army asked them, invited them to open that road, because without them, there will not be that opening. Nobody remembers them. So these are the diplomacy that we need to go more and more undocumented.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll talk more about the power of the individual in a minute, but we were talking about track one diplomacy. And Arancha, you actually, as a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, how has the notion of feminist foreign policy developed in your career, and where do you see it going now?
Well, thank you very much, Kathryn. And let me start with an anecdote. When I proposed that Spain adopt feminist foreign policy 2020, I went to Parliament to get Parliament buy-in. And I still remember there's two gentlemen, let's say rather traditional, telling me if feminist foreign policy was going to be that I would paint the ministry in pink. So I had to explain that it's not about painting anything in pink. We've already done that. What we needed to do is be true to the notion that we care about equality, that something as basic as equality that is enshrined in our Constitution and that we take clearly very seriously for domestic policy making also had to be our guiding light internationally. It had to be part of our foreign policy. It had to be part of our development policy. It had to be part of our security and our security arrangements, of the missions, the peacekeeping missions that we have around the world. It had to be a reality in our ministry. And eventually, we would want also to have a Madam UN Secretary General, hopefully. So it's incorporating this dimension in foreign policy in all its dimensions. You know, if you ask me, Kathryn, I think we've moved from the exotic beginnings of Sweden, and we owe a lot to former Swedish Foreign Minister Margot Wallström for starting it, for taking this and making this a reality. So from exotic to more mainstream. Close to 15 countries now have a feminist foreign policy. But what I observe now is also a move from thinking about this as a structural change instrument to something that looks a little bit more like a PR instrument. And we have to be careful not to transform feminist diplomacy into some form of PR exercise without content. It has to continue to be. We have to make sure that we continue to use it as an instrument for structural transformation. And for that, reports, annual reports, indicators, and the support of parliaments will be essential. So not painting in pink, we've done that, check that box, but let's work on using this to structurally transform the manner in which we are doing foreign policy.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I just recently was engaging with a woman in the military, and she said we have come from having no women to having check marks of first, but now we have to mainstream this. And the first does smack sometimes of this PR effort, right? And that it has to become more the norm than the exception. Well, with that, I want to turn to Vanessa, because you are very much a standout at the UN. You have a special vantage point from your position there. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how feminist foreign policy has sort of morphed in your career.
So I've been a diplomat for over 30 years, and I am now representing Malta on the Security Council. Those who know the way the Security Council works, there are 5 permanent members and 10 elected, and it is really sad for me to say that in 79 years of UN history, I'm only the 27th woman to be elected to the Council. So it is not a good statistic at all, because we need both men and women at the table. Because I have learned firsthand, especially in the 2 years that I've been on the Council, that we bring different perspectives, and you need both. So whilst men want to end the war, women want to bring peace, and the difference is not nuanced. It is an important difference, and you need both perspectives. So yes, we have had successes. We are 5 women on the Council. We are a force, because 1/3 of the Council is feminine. This means that we have a viable WPS power, right? Because you need to have a minimum of 1/3 of any process to be women. But as you were saying, it shouldn't just be a PR exercise. We have statistics, we have facts. We know that if women are included in peace processes, these processes have a chance of 10 more years of success. We know it. We know that if women are signatories to peace agreements, that 90%, on average, 90% of the agreement is implemented, as opposed to 77% if it's men. So we know this, so we have to use our platform to ensure that we have women in these processes. And for me, that is how I interpret feminist diplomacy in the current role that I have. So when we are negotiating renewals of mandates of the UN, of peacekeeping missions, what have you, we always make sure, as Malta, we are at the forefront to ensure we have cross-cutting language on the meaningful inclusion of women in processes. And we work with and give voices to women, because it is important to use our platform. When I presided over the Council, we had all our briefers in all our Security Council meetings who were women, in all the diversity, because we need to provide these platforms to them, and we need to show the importance of having women at the table.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jocelyne, let me turn to you. We've had an evolving concept of feminist diplomacy, feminist foreign policy. Tell me what it means to you and how you have experienced it.
First of all, as I'm not fluent in English, I'm going to read, and I apologize for it. Yes, I think diplomacy feminist can become a weapon of peace, I think, really. Now it's still a work in progress. It's a very young concept which needs to grow. It's barely 10 years old. It was only created by Margot Wallström, as Arancha said, in 2014. Today, around 20 countries claim to have one, but there are no common definition. Each one puts its own spin on it. Sometimes it looks more like a local cooking recipe than a public policy. It is not organized on a multilateral level, not as it registered in a common roadmap. We need to build a common public policy. Perhaps starting with the European Union, since it was born in Europe, and most of the countries that have adopted one are European. But Kathryn, you asked me what feminist diplomacy will look like, and I like to answer, I have a dream. In the future, the United Nations will have proposed a common definition adopted unanimously by all 193 member states. Each country will place at the heart of its diplomacy not only equality for all, but also the obligation of solidarity towards all women and girls who are discriminated against in their country because of their sex. So, for example, Afghan women who manage to leave Afghanistan will be automatically and without any procedure accepted with refugee status in any other country. And women will take part in all peace and post-crisis negotiations on an equal footing with their male colleagues. Quota and the goal of parity will long since have become an integral part of our culture. And women diplomats will sit equally with men on the UN Security Council, where resolutions for peace are taken. And this resolution will be respected because international law will be an essential value for all governments.
Well, I vote for that. I absolutely do. I'll go back to Begonia, and you've talked to me previously about the power of the individual and also the power of individual professions in advancing this sort of peer-to-peer, grassroots, track 3 approach. So data is very important. So the scientific community, women documenting climate change and the impact on journalists, the voices of journalists, the voices of humanitarian workers, this peer-to-peer sort of approach. Expand on that a little bit. You have vast experience in this.
Well, first of all, I mean, diplomacy is not as we used to study in the faculties. Now, all of us, we do some sort of diplomacy in our daily lives. And this sometimes diplomats are a little bit upset because it's not sorry about my colleagues. But in a way, who cannot say that Malala has done a huge diplomacy for education? Who is not saying that amazing singers that we have worked with them or actresses have done amazing things? I have seen how singers that we know, but will not say names, have sit down and have made possible to change laws in certain countries. Talking about, for instance, the precursor of UNESCO, the International Committee on Intellectual Cooperation, Marie Curie was the person that made possible that Albert Einstein and many others created later on that institution, and were asking things about why men and women have war in their minds. So let's not think that we cannot do something, because these are individuals, maybe they are very high-level individuals, but let me tell you something. Not only feminist policy, foreign policy is done by only women. I work with somebody that maybe some of you know, Father Alec Reid in Ireland, and he was one of the persons with Harold Good and with the US facilitator that witnessed the decommission of the weapons of IRA. I worked with him 25 years ago, a lot, many, many years. And a priest said clearly, before we now theorize on feminist foreign policy, said, I'm not going to allow to have in the meeting more men than women, because I know that the results will not be pragmatical and good results. So he refused, being one of the main persons involved in that conflict, a priest, that he will not allow to have only men, because there will not be results of the meetings. So as you can see, a lot of things. Other message I want to see, and because we always talk about Afghanistan and Afghan women and girls, is that there is a moment by which, as Arancha was saying, this PR, foreign policy, I'm just going to quote what New York Times is citing today. A lot of countries have said, we defend Afghan women and girls, but they are approaching pragmatically the Taliban, and the rights of women and girls are a trade-off. So we have to be very careful and very thorough to look at what happens after also the agreements are signed.
That's very interesting. You know, I just did a conference last week in New York with women in Northern Ireland who are still advancing the peace process, and that is still very much a process. But what a visionary to include women so early on. That's quite an example. Thank you. Arancha, I would like to really go to education. How do we break out of the sort of structures of teaching diplomacy, and how do we advance what we're all talking about here on the stage today?
So this is, it's very important because as we need the pioneers, as we need the fighters, as we need the leaders, we also need the young generations. And we need the young generations to build this issue in a scientific manner, with arguments, with data, with artificial intelligence that allows us now to be much more forceful and much more targeted at what needs doing, which is one of the reasons why we in SciencesPo, and you know, you have seen a number of great young women in this on stage today, so I don't need to do any more publicity, done. They speak for it, but we need also in universities to construct these programs that will incorporate the issue of feminist diplomacy very clearly into the curricula. And Kathryn, let me tell you what is worrying me today at the time when we have such high levels of violence, of conflict, of polarization, that this issue of gender equality becomes yet another victim. And if, like I think all of us here in this room think that this issue should not be another victim, and we should protect this as being a fundamental element of our democracies, then it's not only top-down, it also has to be very bottom-up.
Mm-hmm. Well, it certainly is in this environment. Vanessa, you've been very active in many different regions. Tell us a little bit about what you've been able to do at the UN.
So, talking about Afghanistan, just before I came up on stage today at the Security Council, we have our annual meeting on the anniversary of the WPS resolution. And yes, some things in my statement, which were drafted by my gender experts who are women, are sent to head office and maybe, you know, edited by men who will remove statements such as, with reference to Afghanistan, institutionalized misogyny, systematic gender persecution. We keep those in because we are women, and that is important. And a man who is editing a statement might view it from a different lens, and this is why it is important for us today. So I'm proud of the voice that I have given to these, but some of the things that I have managed to achieve, and I think it is really, I mean, of course, I represent my country, Malta, and it is the beliefs of my country, but we are, and the positions of my country, but being a woman has made a difference. I managed to get the first resolution on the Middle East passed in the Security Council in almost a decade, because the Security Council, unfortunately, is very divided when it comes to the Middle East. And this was in November, and this led to the negotiated agreement for a 7-day pause. 105 hostages were released, prisoner exchange, and it was me, and I think it was because I am a woman and because there are 5 women on the council. The women made a difference. We have it in our constitution not to take no for an answer. really. And I saw that in action when I was working on this, which was the most difficult thing that I've had to work on. But the women really stuck together. We were feeling inhuman, and we felt that we could no longer see what we were seeing, and we had to feel human again. And we compromised, yes, because nobody was happy with that resolution. We wanted a ceasefire, clearly. We wanted everybody to be released, clearly. But we managed to do something which was important at the time, early on. Now, a year later, we know that there should have been more done, but that's what was managed to be achieved at the time.
Thank you. Jocelyne, we have to wrap it up with you because we're running a little bit short of time, but I wanted to ask you, you've spoken to me about who embodies this sort of feminist foreign policy. I would like to know your thoughts on that.
There are several political figures I can think of who, in my opinion, embody the concept of feminist diplomacy. They happen to be women. I'm thinking of Vigdis Finnbogadottir, the first woman elected to head a country in 1980. It's a country in Iceland. It's a country that continues to have women as prime minister and is at the top of the egalitarian list. I'm thinking of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand or Sanna Marin in Finland. And there are barely 10% women heads of state of government in the world. But a number of women politicians has begun to invent a different form of governance. And of course, I'm thinking of the creator of this new feminist diplomacy policy, Margot Wallström. And when she conceived it in 2014, her aim was to combat the systemic and global discrimination and subordination of women, putting the subject of equality of the heart of the country's foreign strategy and women on an equal footing with men in diplomatic posts was a really revolutionary vision of society, as it implied a radical paradigm shift to view society differently.
You know, I just want to have you tell everyone what you told me before we came on stage.
Oh, yes.
It's a really good
yes.
thing to remember.
Yes, I just think that it's men who foment war, and feminist diplomacy is really a weapon of peace. It can be a weapon of peace, and so I think that peace is too important to be left to men.
How can we top that? Thank you very much, ladies. Thank you.